Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 141, Getting Past the 75% Point. This episode came about because I have a project that I've been at the 75% completed point for many weeks. And I started thinking about this a little bit more because I also work with a faculty writing group on campus. And one of the things that I commonly see is that people tend to get sort of into a project and abandon it at those early stages. But then we also have a grouping of faculty that at the point where maybe they're 75% finished with it, they just never make the final push to get it out the door, get it published, get it completed, do that final cover letter to submit it somewhere, do that final edit on it, and so on. And so today, what I decided to do was talk a little bit about how I am moving past that 75% point. So what I have is a draft of an introductory chapter for an edited collection. It's been at that 75%, maybe even 80% completed stage for several weeks now. And after a while, I started thinking, could I knock this out today? Could I knock it out in a half an hour? What would it take to do that? The short answer is no, I could not do that in my just the way that I could not do it this morning to make it happen for me. But what I did do was think through what will it take to do that final push to get that last 25% done. And so what I thought I'd share with you today are some of the strategies that I'm using right now to get myself to get this chapter completed and out the door. So for the record, it's a Thursday in September of 2023. I had about an hour and 40 minutes to work this morning on this draft that was about 75% completed. And my goal is to get rid of it sometime on Friday. So sometime within the next 48 hours, well, now 24 hours, I'm planning to get rid of this draft. So this does mean even though I'm 75% of the way there, I'm still missing 25%. So that means that I have to take some action to complete that last 25%. And it might mean that I'm making some choices not to include things at this point. So how I decided to get to writing today was really thinking about the fact that this has been a kind of a nagging task for a while. It's due. I owe it to other people. So I have some external pressures, which prompted me to start thinking about working on it in the first place. And my regular impetus to kind of work with a project like this is just to kind of go slow and steady, work during my regular writing time, bit by bit until it's finally worked out. And that might mean I write, 4 hours over the course of the week. It might mean that I write on weekdays from 9 to 11 in the morning. And once it's finished, which a lot of times that is the way that I complete work. But for this particular project, I started thinking about, well, what does it actually take? And so one of the things that I found today to be really helpful is that, like all things, when it's a priority, sometimes you have to do the legwork 24 hours before to make it a priority. So for me, before I even woke up today, I knew that I was going to have what sometimes I call a singular focus on completing this writing project. So it's a couple weeks into the semester. I already have grading to do. I definitely have lesson planning or course planning to do. I do some recruitment for my graduate program. I have visits to set up. I work with faculty on tenure and promotion. That just started this week. I have faculty to get back to that ask all kinds of questions about dossiers. So I have a lot of those priorities, as many of you do too. I have family obligations. My children are back in school, but school activities have started. There's just a lot of moving parts with everything. And so what I decided to do today was that no matter what, like after I, shuttled everybody off where they need to be, my very first stop is to go and work on this introduction. So I didn't look at email. I didn't answer the phone. I have like 5 texts sitting, on my phone about various things, some of which are a little bit important. I mean, not emergencies. No one is going to die, but they're definitely important. They have to be handled today. I didn't do anything with any of it. So I decided I'm going to work on this introduction first with a singular focus. I knew I had about an hour and 40 minutes of uninterrupted time. And that's all I did. I didn't even open up the internet to start working on it. And I know this is a strategy that a lot of people do. It's not novel. It's not new. But for me, I had to make sure that I knew all I'm going to do is drive myself to the library, open my laptop. My draft was already ready to go. It was already laid out right there. I knew I was going to do something with it. And here's the part with these projects that are 75%, 80% completed. A lot of times you haven't worked on them in a while. In my case, I haven't read this draft for more than 2 weeks. And so that's not a super long period of time, but it's long enough with the start of the semester and new classes. I didn't even remember what I needed to still do to complete that 75 or 80%. So the second thing that I did once I got into the library, opened up my laptop, is I sat there and I started reading through the draft. And as I was reading, I was improving some wording because enough time had gone by that I could fix a couple of like wording ways I phrased different sentences. I could clean up some structural things. But at the same time, I was also working out a list of what had to happen for me to finish this last, 20 to 25% of items. So what I want to show on screen today, for those of you that are just audio listening, I'll describe it. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. But I've mentioned before that I really like using Penzu for all kinds of things. It's just a free online writing journal. I use it as a way to just kind of take notes on projects. I do my project management for most things in Asana. But for Penzu, I just use this as kind of just a spot where I have these notes about things. And so for me, one of the things that was most helpful was just to assume that any old list that I had about this project or any old notes I had about this project, I'm not going to remember them. I might not necessarily know where they are. They probably live, and as I'm showing on the screen, they probably live somewhere in my Penzu list. But for me, it was most helpful to kind of look at this project with fresh eyes and just think with this singular focus, what do I need to do to get this last 25% of it complete? So what is on screen right now is this introduction and some of the things that I knew I had to work through. So some of the things that are on this list are, I worked with my co-editors to change the title. So I had to make sure that was going through the introduction in the right way. I wanted to say something about the new title in the introduction. So that's in there. I added some subtitles as I was reading through this draft. There were some in there before, but there weren't many, and they didn't really describe what was going on. So I had some subtitles that I'm still playing with, but I also listed on my notes here so I could keep thinking about them. And then I made a list of some tasks that need to happen. So what I found and how I kind of determined I was at the 75% point is that I really need a final section to be written. It's not a long section, but as it's an introduction to an edited collection. And so what it needs to do is introduce the various chapters that are in the collection. So that's the section that needs to be written. So it's not necessarily a difficult task, but it requires strategic thinking because I have to think about what is the order of these chapters? Why are they linked together in that way? What does each contribute? How much do I want to say about each one? These are all questions that happen with edited collections. I haven't done one in a while. I think the last one I did was 15 years ago or something like that. So, I really needed to think through these big questions as I was looking at what I already had in terms of content. Other things that happened were, as I was reading, to make sure that I didn't get distracted from just kind of reading the thing top to bottom and just getting a grip on what had to happen, anything that I knew I had to give some attention to got a quick yellow highlight. So one of my tasks on here says fix the yellow highlights. And some of these things were like missing citations, but some of them were sentences that I just wasn't sure about. Like I might make a claim saying that, oh, we have so many studies in this collection that use interviews, but I wasn't really sure about the number. I might highlight something like that. There definitely were a couple of terms I wasn't sure if I actually defined anywhere else in the introduction. I highlighted those. So those were the kinds of things I was looking for as I was reading. So as a recap, I was reading the draft. I had this list open and I was taking notes as I read, and because I was kind of hopping back and forth between the draft and between this list. And the reason I'm making a point to say that is that I think it's all well and good to say, read what you wrote and make a list. But that doesn't account for the jumping back and forth that happens between those two. So in my case, I would click back and forth between two tabs. I'm on my screen right now. We'll see tons of multiple tabs because I've been in lots of other things this morning. But at the time that I was working on this, I had Microsoft, this was in a Google Docs at this point, a Google Doc, and then I had Penzu open. That's all I had. So I was just clicking back and forth between those two things. Anything that I needed to look up. So for me, one of the things I need to look at is a description of boundaries of my discipline, like what are the components that make a discipline, because I know some scholars have talked about that. And I thought it was this one scholar, but then I wasn't sure if it was this other one. So I just wrote a little note about that on Penzu to find out where is that quote and who said it. But I didn't go right then and there to go look it up. In a normal writing session, let's say if I'm like halfway through or a third of the way through, I might have stopped to go and get that thing. If it was something I was reasonably sure I could get within the next 5 minutes, I probably would keep right along, find the spot where I needed it, go and get it, and then come back and put it in the draft and keep going. I tend to, if it's something quick that I can do, I do tend to hop out of the draft to go do it to save the time and having to do it later. But for faculty that spend, or academics that spend time writing and they have a trouble with getting distracted, like you go to Google to look something up and then next thing you know, you're way off of your project. Maybe that's not the strategy for you. Maybe a highlight is better to go back and look at it. But in this case, I didn't do it for that very reason. I wanted to make sure I just kept reading top to bottom to get a grip on what's the shape of this piece and how close I was. Another thing I discovered on this read as I was kind of getting to this closing point is now, because 75 to 80% of it is written, I can see where some holes are that need to be addressed. So one of the things that I found interesting that I had not done in the previous version of this draft was that I never said anything about this word interventions, and I use it a lot. And what I mean, take that to mean, the edited collection is all about faculty writing research and what works with faculty writers and graduate student writers. And so I sometimes call those interventions, but I never talk about the word intervention. I don't have synonyms for it. I probably use it too much. So I just wrote myself a question, like, do I work with the word interventions in this introduction? And I also wrote a secondary question. Is it about what happens when you introduce a new technique or strategy with faculty writers? So I'm asking myself the question, what do I even mean by that word? So I didn't get bothered by it. I didn't get stopped. I didn't get bogged down. I put that on my list as something I know I need to address in the next pass. And then I just built a bulleted list of things that need to happen. So what I realized is I really need 4 things to happen for me to close the loop. So I made just a kind of a task list. So I got to look up a quote. I need to fix some yellow highlights. I need to decide what I'm doing with the word intervention. And then the very last thing is I know I have to write this section about these various chapters in this collection. And so one thing I know I need to do before I can write that section, which I don't think will be difficult, I have to kind of decide what's the framework and write it. But one thing that has to happen for me is I need to step outside of my draft. So this is a task that is going to require me to do something not in the draft, to go look at those chapters again and just quickly decide what order they're going in. They already have an order. I sort of loosely already know because I'm 75 to 80% there, but I really want to look at them again in case there's some other interesting combinations. And why I'm saying that is because one of the things I discovered today as I was kind of writing along, cleaning up wording, cleaning up my organizing, is I came across the idea of saying, hey, what would be really useful with this is somebody's picking up this book because they want to know how to help faculty writers, or they're doing research with faculty writers. I kind of went down that, thinking through that for a couple of minutes. I didn't spend 20 minutes, but I spent 5 thinking about, what would be really helpful here would be some kind of a reader's guide, because there's different populations that are probably going to use this book, and have a quick user's guide, reader's guide. Hey, if you're a faculty developer, you might want this book to do XYZ. If you're somebody studying faculty writing in writing studies research, you might want it to look at these chapters, and so on. And I actually think that thinking will help me figure out how to write that framework, so that the 2 things will kind of feed into each other. So, when you're at this point of the 75 to 80%, one of the things that I think is really interesting that happened to me, and that I've now kind of reflected has happened through lots of other faculty writing that I work with at Defend, Publish, and Lead, is that sometimes there's a circling back to some of the bigger questions that decide what makes this piece finished or what makes it whole. I realized it cannot be a finished piece without talking about the word interventions. It can't be a finished piece without having that last section on there. So, one of the things I think is really helpful at this point is to kind of take a step back, give it a read, and then make that list of what needs to happen with fresh eyes. Because maybe some lofty goals that you made when it was like 40% complete, maybe they're either not important anymore or you just can't do them. You're at the point where it needs to be finished. I'm at the point where this needs to be finished. It's almost 2 weeks overdue from when I promised I would turn it in. Like many faculty writers, I'm late today on it. So what I'm trying to think about here is what are the things that are going to make the biggest impact? And so another thing to consider maybe at the 80%, 75, 80% marker is, okay, I only want to give this project so many more hours. What are the things that will make the biggest impact? And for me, I'm going to use Friday. I'm going to do everything I can on Friday to make this stuff happen. And whatever I can't get done, I won't get done. So for those of you that have been listening to the podcast regularly, a lot of times I do my own writing, for 2 hours. I try to do like 9 to 11 or 1 to 3 on the weekdays. I try to do 8 to 10 hours a week of writing. So for me, this might mean this particular Friday that I'm doing 6 hours of writing. I don't really know. But what I do know is I've given myself sort of a hard stop for a Friday at 5 p.m. So it's gone by then, done or not. So another thing that I think can help you close between 75 and 100% complete, for me, the first thing that I'm going to need to do is write that new section. I think that's the thing that's going to be the most time consuming, but that thing is a piece it's non-negotiable. There has to be some kind of introduction to these other chapters. So I know that has to be in there. A second thing that I'm going to do then is look at interventions. So I'm already starting to think through some of these priorities. I'm going to think through that word because I think it's important, but I don't think I need to spend a lot of time. I might have a paragraph or even a couple sentences talking about it. Next, I'm going to go to those yellow highlights. And then lastly, I'm going to look up the boundaries of the discipline and try to find that quote. I may have to go without it if I run out of time to find it. So another thing I'm trying to prioritize here is I'm not trying to look at tasks that are the quickest to check off the list. I'm trying to think what's actually going to make this project complete, which to me is a different question. And so in this case, I'm going for kind of a mixed bag of things. The new section I need to write, I don't think it will take me all that long, but it takes some background work ahead of it. So one of the things I'm going to be doing to be ready for Friday writing is to start looking at all those chapters real quick and just sort them in an order. Like, these are the ones about grad students. These are the ones that use interview methodology. These are the ones that use survey, and so on. So I have those groupings ready to go. And that way, when I come in Friday, I can go and start doing that. So I'm hoping this episode is helpful for thinking through how you might close your gap between the 75%, 80% completed projects. A lot of times those are the projects that are the closest just by the amount completed. They're the closest to publication. And sometimes the things that we have saved for the end are some of the toughest things. That's why you just never did them in the first place. And I know for me, one of the things that was tougher with this particular chapter is I had not really thought of a good order, and I hadn't really worked with my co-editors on thinking of a good order for how we wanted to put these chapters. They have an order right now, but it's more, kind of loosely around some other groupings we used that I determined now are maybe not quite as relevant. And so for closing that loop and actually completing this project, I really had to do some of that hard thinking that I didn't do earlier on in this project. And so that might mean tonight on Thursday, when I'm doing some groundwork for Friday, I probably still have like an hour-ish of thinking on this project about where everything's going to go. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you can knock out an hour and 40 minutes and be, all the way to 100%. For some projects, you might be able to do that. I know that there will still be some legwork required for me to be really ready to do some of these tasks on Friday. I'm definitely shooting to be done finished Friday at 5 p.m. There could be a problem as I'm writing. It might mean I don't actually do it till Monday. Maybe I run out of time. Maybe there's some kind of interruption. But for me, I want that pressure, that singular focus on getting this chapter done, which means any other projects, any other kind of shiny objects going on, I'm ignoring all of that. And I'm just singularly focusing on completing this. So as one final note, a way that might still happen. So right as I'm doing this podcast episode, it's around noon on Thursday morning. I still have some free time today. I don't have a lot, but I have some. I have a pocket of around 20 minutes in one spot, and I have another pocket of around 35 in another spot. I know these are the tasks I need to knock out. So one of the things that I could be doing during those times is looking at those chapters. I could start doing some of those yellow highlights in those small minutes. But the other reason I made that list of tasks, it allows me to kind of pick and choose based on the time I have available. So I'm hoping that this helps, and happy writing this week.